Please join me in welcoming Adam Baratta, the #1 Wall Street Journal USA Today bestselling author of The Great Devaluation and Gold is a Better Way. An award-winning writer and director, Adam's illustrious Hollywood career has featured collaborations with Marvel legend Stan Lee and National Hockey League, NBC Universal, and Comcast, showcasing his exceptional talent for wavering narratives with depth and nuance. He also is the visionary behind the nation's top-rated gold IRA company. Adam, the stage is yours.
In 2013, I went through a very difficult time in my life. I was homeless. My car was repossessed. I couldn't afford to feed my dog. So I called a buddy to borrow a couple $100, and he said, "Sure, come on over." And when I got to his office, I asked a question that would forever change my life. "What do you guys do here?" He said, "We sell gold." "Any chance you're hiring?" I wondered. He looked at me and he said, "Adam, what, you sell gold? No, man, you don't want to do this. I want to do what you're doing. I want to be a big Hollywood producer." I said, "I don't know if you can tell, I'm pretty busted over here. Get me an interview." My first day in the gold business was Friday, March 29th, 2013. If you're wondering what I knew about gold, I knew that it was shiny, that it was found on pirate ships, and that rappers wore it around their necks. So if you're here today and you're wondering what's going on with this gold thing, recognize that you know more than I did on my first day. Little did I know that within the next 7 years, I would write not one, but 2 #1 national best-selling books. I'd be considered an expert on the topic and teach countless people about money and gold. So I'm going to start today with a bold promise. In the next 17 minutes, I'm going to teach you more about the past, present, and future of money than you will learn anywhere else. They do not teach this course at Harvard, I assure you. The premise of Gold is a Better Way was very simple. I believe that long-term investors would be far better off putting their money into gold than putting it into stocks and bonds. The book was published in 2018. It needed time to prove the premise. 8 years later, gold has outperformed the stock and bond markets 2-to-1. Now you might be sitting here saying, "Well, yeah, Adam, but gold's really, exploded higher. That's kind of cherry picking." Okay, keep in mind, the stock market is today hovering at all-time highs. And the reality is that it was a book based in math. So let's take a look at the math. Over the last 25 years, the cost of the things we buy, hamburgers, cars, homes, has gone up about 2.4 times. The things that we invest in, stocks and bonds, after paying taxes and fees, are up 2.75 times. This means that the investor has outpaced inflation by a whopping 10% over the last 25 years. So consider 3 people in the year 2000. They had $100,000. You have your working class guy. His $100,000 today buys him $71,000 worth of things. The investor class woman who did the right thing, put her money in stocks and bonds, followed the 60-40 portfolio, she now has $110,000 of buying power. And that crazy gold investor, he's got $1.25 million of buying power. That's after paying taxes and fees. Gold has been a better way. Gold was $280 an ounce in the year 2000. Today it's hovering around $5,000, up 18 times, but after taxes and fees, about 12 and a half times. But you see, to understand why this is the case, we need to go back in time. From 1980 to the year 2000, let's consider these same three people. Our working class guy, his $100,000 still bought him about $100,000 worth of stuff because his income kept up with inflation. During this disinflationary time, the investor class saw returns of 10 to 1 on their investments. And that crazy gold guy lost 67% of his value as gold dropped significantly. And the point of this is inflation sits on the opposite side of investing. Investing is about sacrificing today to have more tomorrow. But if tomorrow's dollars are devalued, well, then you have completely eliminated the benefit of the sacrifice. In 2019, we crossed a line. There is a moment that we go from inflation to debasement. That moment happened in January of 2019. It's kind of like swimming out in the ocean too far. You can't get back to the shore and you can't cross to the other side, so even though you may be flapping your arms, effectively, you're dead. Our monetary system died in January of 2019 when Jerome Powell famously pivoted and stopped normalizing the balance sheet. And in order to really appreciate what this looks like or what it feels like, I refer to a Merle Travis song called 16 Tons. Some of you may know it. You load 16 tons, what do you get? Another day older and deeper in debt. St. Peter, don't you call me, 'cause I can't go. I owe my soul to the company store. Yeah. The company store was where this song was about Kentucky coal miners who got their goods, their clothes, their food, their equipment from the company store. And the store sold them their goods on credit. And because the company store would inflate the prices of their goods, their incomes could never outpace that inflation of the prices. They owed their soul to the company store. Well, we as a world owe our soul to the company store. We have global debt that is 3 times our global GDP. We have swum out too far. There is no way that we can grow our way out of this. Growth comes with higher interest rates. Higher interest rates comes with higher debt servicing costs. And so we are in a fiscal doom loop where we can't grow our way out. We certainly can't do it through austerity, because if we spend less and save, well, paper markets would collapse. So there is no way out of this situation without pain. And I want to explain something about debt that I think you'll all find interesting. Debts don't get destroyed. They get transferred. If we look at the last 25 years, we'll see that it was the leverage of speculators during the dot-com boom that led to this massive overvaluation. And of course, when that leverage collapsed, the dot-coms collapsed. At that moment, Alan Greenspan lowered interest rates to 1%. All of that debt was then transferred to the banks, who, through a housing boom and their collateralized debt obligations, created a ton of leverage. And when that leverage blew up, we had the housing collapse. At that moment, all of that debt was transferred to the central bank. The Federal Reserve balance sheet was $800 billion in 2008. It rose to $9 trillion by the year 2020. So the central bank took all of that debt, and the question of the great devaluation is, where would that debt be transferred next? The answer is quite simple: to the currency. We are now witnessing that transfer to the currency. We are living inside the great devaluation. But before we go ahead and start saying the dollar is going to zero and it's the end of the world, is the dollar really getting destroyed? It really depends on how you measure it. The dollar index measures the dollar against a basket of other currencies. In the year 2000, it was at where we are roughly today. So when you measure the dollar against currencies of the world, the dollar has been very stable. However, when you measure it against gold, you can see that the dollar has lost tremendous value. Which is why we have to go back to what the dollar actually was founded on. You see, J.P. Morgan, he created the Federal Reserve and the dollar system, and we couldn't print any dollars without physical gold backing it. We became the world's reserve currency in 1944 after World War II at Bretton Woods, and that agreement was very simple. The dollar would be backed by gold, every other currency we would peg to the dollar, and this was the system that has launched the post-war. In 1944, an ounce of gold was $36. Today, it's $5,000. We have not maintained that store of value that we promised the world when we became the world's reserve currency. In 1971, President Nixon closed the gold window, making the dollar a fiat currency. Since that time, the dollar has been the most powerful currency ever known to man. And a truism was sparked: when the dollar is strong, gold is weak. Conversely, when the dollar is weak, gold is strong. And as I ended the book, I realized that I had been asking the wrong question. See, I had been sitting here trying to figure out, how are we going to get out of all this debt? How are we ever going to pay this back? But the reality is, the question I should have been asking is, if everyone is in debt, every individual, every household, every corporation, every nation, if everyone is in debt, who is the creditor? And what you can see here is that this is a cycle. And the cycle really matters. And let me explain why it matters to all of you here right now. There is an 80-year cycle of monetary systems, and they always follow the same pattern: debasement, populism, war. And they happen very consistently on this 80-year cycle. The French Revolution was in the 1780s. 80 years after that, we had the Civil War. 80 years after that, we had World War II. Right now, we are at the precipice of another world war. We are in the midst of the great devaluation. And here's the thing: if you're watching the world today wondering what's going on, appreciate one thing: debasement always leads to populism. Debasement creates anger amongst the people who want to change the structure of the system. So debasement is the cause of this populism we're seeing, that populism is anger, and the anger is at a system that is no longer making sense. Now, the post-war system created at Bretton Woods created many organizations: NATO, the IMF, the World Trade Organization, the World Health Organization, and at the head of all of them was the Federal Reserve. These institutions are what help the world globalize. They account for massive productivity around the world. They served to keep the peace after World War II, and here we are today. Well, 2 weeks ago, the United States left the World Health Organization. The WTO and the IMF are next, and we all know how this administration is addressing NATO. End the Fed is a chant that we now hear from a multitude of players, not only in this country, but across the world. And so the question is, if the system is ending, how do we fix it? Well, if debasement is the creation of the anger, rebasement is what will allow the system to start anew. How do you rebase the system? Well, we go back to the thing that we all don't understand: gold. See, J.P. Morgan said that gold is money, everything else is credit. Credit requires faith. Gold does not. Gold is one of those magical elements that you can melt down, turn into a liquid, recast, and voila, it doesn't lose any of its atomic properties. So if you're wondering why gold's exploding higher, central banks around the world all own gold and are all buying gold because they understand gold can be trusted. The promises of other leaders and nations and these institutions can no longer be trusted. We all heard Mark Carney talking about a rupture. This is what's happening in our world right now, and it's relevant to all of us here. Monetary rebasement is something that occurs. In the last 80 years, we've had a couple monetary rebasements. In 1934, FDR revalued gold. It was that action, by the way, that got us out of the Great Depression. But it wasn't entrenched as the world's reserve currency until 1944, 10 years later. I mentioned that Nixon closed the gold window in 1971, but it wasn't until 1981 that the system was rebased when Paul Volcker raised interest rates to 20%. We right now are in the midst of the great devaluation. The natural timeline on that would be 2030. So we are in the process of that debasement right now. That monetary reset, if it follows the cycle, will likely happen at the end of this decade. But if you have to follow the through line that our debts get transferred, if the debt all is transferred to the currency, who does the currency owe the money to? The currency owes the money to gold. The question is, at what price? Well, in 1944, the Dow to gold ratio was 4 to 1. In 1981, that Dow to gold ratio was 1 to 1. Today, it's 10 to 1. So if we're basing where gold needs to get to reset the system, somewhere between $12,000 and $50,000 per ounce. Now, I know we have a lot of investors in this room. This is a chart of the gold market cap relative to the stock market. As you can see, we are nowhere near where it needs to get to in other rebasements. I'm really honored to be speaking here at Harvard, a place I never could have gotten in the traditional way. So thank you for allowing me to slip in through the side door. And frankly, I didn't really know what I was going to speak about today because I no longer am involved in the gold business. I exited that 2 years ago. I have no book to promote. I have no newsletter subscription to sell. In fact, I don't belong here, except I believe that I'm meant to be here, that there's a story that the world needs to hear, and if I have any hope that it's that our world leaders will hear this story. And because I'm a storyteller, I'd like to tell everyone the story of Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great was the son of a king and a queen. He was a brilliant child. He was tutored by Aristotle. He was leading thousands of men as a teenager. But his greatness wasn't sealed until he came across the town of Gordian. Gordian was not they didn't have a big giant army. There wasn't a conquest. Gordian was known for a legend. And the legend was that King Midas had tied a rope to an ox cart to a church pillar, and that the knot was so complex that anyone who could untie this knot would go on to rule all of Asia. When Alexander came to the town of Gordium at the age of 18, with thousands of men behind him and all eyes watching, understanding his destiny, and came to the rope, he didn't do what hundreds of men had tried in the 600 years prior by unwinding and untwisting. He simply took out his sword, cut the rope, and said, "It makes no difference how it's loosened." Today, we say cutting the Gordian knot, and it refers to a bold solution to an impossibly complex problem. We have an 80-year Gordian knot of debt. Money printing on top of money printing, derivatives on top of derivatives, collateralized obligations. The makers of the system don't even understand how it's all leveraged. And so my hope is that our current leaders have a plan. We all hearing about the golden age, the gold card, the golden dome. Everything has a gold branding. And it's my hope that this administration is not talking about a promise, but they're actually talking about a policy. I hope that the administration understands that this Gordian knot of debt cannot be unwound, that the system needs a bold, decisive cut. And I believe that cut of the sword has to happen through gold. I believe if we do that, we can be in position for a golden renaissance. Let me explain why this would actually work. The major countries in the world own 23,000 tons of gold. Currently has a 26-to-1 debt to gold ratio. A 5 times revaluation of the gold price would recollateralize every single government in the world because we all own gold. Imagine if your home suddenly went up 5 times in value, how much more money you could actually borrow. So that number looks like $25,000. And it is my hope that the leaders of the world will get together this year at the G20. The G20 is where all of the leaders of the world get together. It's being hosted by the United States for the first time in decades this year. And my plea to our leaders, if we want to avoid another war, if we want to avoid the painful depression and collapse that comes from this over-leveraged system, to please, through an accord, not through one country doing it, we all get together, revalue gold, and allow the world to start once again from a solid foundation. I'm hoping for a golden renaissance. Thank you very much.